Generally, the moon hoaxers think that the astronauts have orbited the Earth during the whole lunar mission. That's the hypothesis of Ralph Wren in particular. However, this hypothesis poses a problem. It implies that the astronauts would have necessarily known about the hoax, and that they would have intentionally lied when they said they landed on the moon and walked on it. It's little probable that the CIA would have accepted to run the chance that an astronaut would spill the beans and admit he did not walk on the moon because of the guilt which was weighing on him. No, for the sake of the secrecy, they had to genuinely believe they walked on the moon, and that was excluding sending them orbit the Earth, for in this case, they could not have ignored the hoax. They had to be taken in charge at the very start of the mission, even before the rocket lifted off. That's why before the rocket lifted off, they were put to sleep, and secretly extracted from the rocket. Then while they were still asleep, they were put into a simulation cabin, the kind they were using for their trainings, in which they might believe they were traveling to the moon. Thereafter they were taken in charge by the CIA doctors, who were applying on them the famous mind control program MKULTRA. This program had been developed in the 60s, and illegally tested on soldiers and prisoners. It was in particular using LSD and also suggestion, hypnosis. These photos, which are extracted from the last magazine of Apollo 17, seem to confirm that the astronauts have been treated with this mind control program. On these photos, the astronauts of Apollo 17 seem to be in a second state, drugged. On some, the astronauts don't look at the camera which takes them in photo. While they were in the hypnotic sleep, the engineers were in charge of making them retain what they had to know about their lunar adventure. Thankfully, instead of saying them things which were making sense, they told them total nonsense instead. So the astronauts may not directly admit they didn't walk on the moon, but the nonsense they say tells it for them. How could Buzz Aldrin ignore that the void was made in the lunar module before Armstrong descended on the moon, for the hatch had no intermediate chamber? Yet, it seems to be the case, as he said, in the movie In the Shadow of the Moon, that he used the time that Armstrong descended on the moon to urinate in the urine collection device of the lunar module, which would have been impossible when he had his spacesuit on. And how could the astronauts ignore that the lunar module could not behave like a helicopter, that it could not pitch forward to move over the lunar surface? If it had pitched forward, its main engine would make the lunar module very rapidly acquire an important speed incompatible with looking for a spot to land on. The only reasonable possible way for the lunar module to move over the lunar surface was to remain vertical and use its lateral thrusters to move in the desired direction. If the astronauts had really flown over the lunar surface, they could not have ignored it. But if the astronauts have not orbited the Earth, then how comes that they have been seen returning in the command module? That's the whole point. They were not in the command module, which splashed into the ocean. The command module was not returning from space. It was dropped from a plane flying at high altitude, in the same time as its parachutes, and splashed into the ocean like it was returning from space. It was not containing the real astronauts, but mannequins instead. This is an excerpt of the video of the recovery of Apollo astronauts, slowed down to allow to better analyze it. We see an astronaut in a basket which is hauled by a helicopter. Look at the astronaut's legs. They are abnormally thin. They are obviously not human legs. Look at his head. There is a camera over him filming him close, and he does not even raise his head to look at the camera. He does not beckon to the camera. And see. Suddenly he cocks his head on the side in an unnatural mechanical way. He is unable to hold his head upright like a human would do. We see no part of his body. He is keeping his helmet on, whereas he now could take it off, for he could freely breathe in Earth's atmosphere, especially since he has no backpack, which means that he has no way to breathe. Is he holding his breath while he is taken to the boat? He is keeping his golden visor down while he could at least lift it up, but if his helmet was removed, or his golden visor raised, we could see he does not have a human face. Later the astronauts were reappearing like they were the same who had been recovered from the command module which had fallen into the ocean. There also were photos of the astronauts being extracted from the command module, but in fact it was not the command module which had been seen splashing into the ocean. This is a snapshot of the press conference of Apollo 17. Those who managed the recovery obviously don't seem very happy of the way it happened. What we see on their faces is rather shame than satisfaction. If most astronauts seem totally convinced that they walked on the moon, some however had doubts, but what happened to them makes doubt that they were free to express their doubts. In particular, in an interview, Pete Conrad clearly expressed his doubts by saying that he was not believing that they had even been close to the moon. Never had an astronaut more clearly expressed his doubts. Shortly after this interview, Conrad had a suspicious motorbike accident. He had not had lethal wounds in this accident, but he was kept during 6 hours in an ambulance, and the doctors asserted that Conrad had an internal bleeding that they were not finding the source of to justify his death. How not to have doubts? James Owen was about to contact Bill Kaysing when he suddenly died of what was supposed to be a heart failure. Armstrong also was an astronaut who was showing doubts. He was fleeing interviews, didn't like to talk about Apollo, had no souvenir of Apollo in his home, and, in the movie, In the Shadow of the Moon of 2007, he is the only still living astronaut who refused to participate, while he obviously should have been the central figure of this movie. In 2012, the doctors proposed him a heart operation he was not really needing. Armstrong had a good health, he was regularly practicing sport, and had no heart problem. However, the doctors insisted to practice this operation on him, arguing that it was a safeguard for his future. This was a very common operation which was practically almost succeeding, but the operation was so badly botched that Armstrong died, not from heart failure as some people believe, but from the consequences of this operation. Some people who are not even moon hoaxers claim that the doctors killed him by their incompetence. We would rather have expected that assertion from moon hoaxers, except that the moon hoaxers would have said that it was more than incompetence. Bart Sbrel, who does not understand that the astronauts have been mentally conditioned to actually believe they walked on the moon, has tried to make them confess they didn't walk on the moon. He had asked the astronauts to swear in the Bible that they had walked on the moon. If Armstrong has refused to comply. On the other hand, Snan has accepted to swear in the Bible he walked on the moon. That does not mean that Snan is a good liar, but that the mind manipulation program has very well worked on him. All along the missions, the doctors seem to have improved their techniques of mind control. When Buzz Aldrin punches Bart Sbrel's face, or that Edgar Mitchell kicks his butt and threatens him to sue him before a court of law, it's absolutely not because they feel ashamed, but much to the contrary, because they feel outraged that Bart Sbrel would doubt they walked on the moon. Bart Sbrel got it completely wrong. He should never have tried to make the astronauts confess they didn't walk on the moon. This was totally hopeless. What he should have done is saying them he knew they were sincere when they said they walked on the moon. but that he wanted to have details about the way they descended on the moon and what they did on it. Then he could have seen that what they were saying was not making the least sense, and it was a way of admitting they never were on the moon. Now, the question is, if the astronauts were not in space, then how could they make all these weightless demonstrations? The answer is water. Water is an environment which is close to a weightlessness environment, and astronauts used to train in water. And another question is, did the Apollo astronauts make themselves all these demonstrations? No, they could not have made themselves these demonstrations, otherwise they would have had doubts. They would have known the missions were hoaxed. It's not the Apollo astronauts who have made these demonstrations, but actors impersonating them. When the fake Buzz shows his profile in the weightless demonstration, we can see that there is something abnormal about his face. He seems to have a mask applied on his face. At a given moment of the video taken in the spaceship of Apollo 13, we can see an astronaut who is obviously James Lovell, as he is wearing his watch on his right wrist, and Lovell was the only left-handed astronaut of Apollo 13. But when we compare the face of this astronaut with the one of Lovell, we can see that this mysterious astronaut has very thick dark eyebrows that Lovell does not have. The beard and moustache can grow during the mission if the astronauts don't shave, but not the eyebrows. The man we see on this sequence is obviously not an astronaut of Apollo 13. Now, if the astronauts of the videos were wearing a mask, this mask could eventually have hidden a sophisticated breathing system allowing the astronauts to breathe in water. But this breathing system should have been conceived in a such way that it would have avoided bubbles which would have exposed the fact that the astronaut was in water. Another very simple possibility is that the actors were trained to practice apnea, and it is very likely that this method has been used in the demonstrations. Trained divers can hold their breath during several minutes. The official record is 22 minutes, but the actors did not have to hold their breath that long. The video is cut as several short sequences, during which the actors could easily hold their breath. Between these sequences, the actors could breathe before the next sequence. If you look well in the demonstration of Buzz Aldrin in Apollo 11, you can notice that the sound is not always synchronized with the move of the lips. Sometimes the astronaut moves his lips and there is no sound, or conversely the astronaut talks but does not move his lips. And it is not because of the distance. The sound and image take the same time to come to us. Now, is there a way to prove as a doubtless way that the Apollo demonstrations have been made in water, or is it just a supposition which cannot be proven? In fact, it is possible to prove that the demonstrations have actually been made in water, for there are differences between the weightless environment and water environment. In a weightless environment, when an object is pushed in a direction, it will always move in the direction it is pushed, and will not change its direction as long as no visible force is applied on it. If the object suddenly changes its direction after having been pushed, it suddenly goes in the converse direction that it has been pushed. It is absolutely impossible in a weightless environment. Is it possible in water? Yes, if you push down in water an object of which the density is lighter than the one of water after having briefly gone down, the push of Archimedes is going to stop it and make it go up instead. Another clue: if you give the specific rotation to an object when you push TS in a weightless environment, it is going to always keep the same direction of rotation. This direction of rotation cannot change. If the direction of rotation of the object keeps randomly changing, it is a very clear sign that the object is not in a weightless environment, for in this environment this absolutely cannot happen. On the other hand, in water, it can perfectly happen. so there are clues which allow to know if objects move in a weightless environment or in water. When a fake Buzz Aldrin makes a PT box spin, this box contains just enough PT so that its global density is the same as the one of water, so that it may appear suspended in water. We can see on this slowed down animation that the spinning speed of the box gradually decreases because of the friction of water, and it could not happen in a weightless environment. We can see the box sway more and more as its spinning speed decreases. Then the astronaut makes a demonstration supposedly showing water droplets moving in the weightless environment. We see the astronaut push a water droplet. This water droplet initially goes in the direction that it has been pushed, and then suddenly changes its mind and goes in the converse direction all by itself. In fact, we can see that the sequence is filmed in bias, for we can see that the walls of the cabin are seen in bias, not vertically. By turning the sequence of 45 degrees clockwise, we can see the real orientation of the sequence. The walls of the cabin are now vertical, and we better understand what is going on. The so-called water droplets are in fact air bubbles which move in water. The astronaut has captured air bubbles under his spoon. He lets an air bubble go, pushes it down with his finger. The air bubble starts going down, but the push of Archimedes forces it to go up instead. This animation illustrates what the astronaut does. He has captured a water bubble under his spoon. He lets it go and pushes it down with his finger. The air bubble starts going down under the impulse of the finger, but the push of Archimedes quickly stops its descent and forces it to move up instead. That's exactly the demonstration that the astronaut actor is doing here. If it had been a water droplet in a weightless environment, the water droplet would have had no reason to move up. After having been pushed down, it would have kept moving down. The actor is simply making us understand that he is in water and not in a weightless environment with this demonstration. Then later we see the PT box start to move up, without the astronaut having visibly given an impulse to it, but instead of keeping a steady rotation, the direction of its rotation randomly changes, like it could not do in a weightless environment, but it can in water. In Apollo 13, James Lovell, or rather the actor who impersonates him, pushes down a bag to rest on his side. But suddenly the bag starts moving up, all by itself, without having received an impulse to do so, and with this characteristic random way typical of water. This bag very obviously contains air. A new demonstration of the push of Archimedes, exposing that the sequence happens in water and not in a weightless environment. Later, an astronaut lets an object, probably a plastic lid, go up, and this object starts randomly rotating in all directions instead of keeping a steady rotation, like it could not do in a weightless environment, but it could in water. This again exposes that the sequence happens in water, and not in a weightless environment. And again in Apollo 15 this time, we can see an astronaut who pushes an object, and this object, instead of keeping a steady rotation, changes its direction of rotation randomly, like it would in water. Finally, a last demonstration in Apollo 15. An astronaut pushes an object ahead of himself, and the object magically returns to him. This cannot happen in a weightless environment. But can this happen in water? Yes, when we understand the trick, how it has been filmed. This animation explains how this sequence has been made. The astronaut who films the sequence is lying horizontally on his back on the bottom of the water pool. The other astronaut is above the astronaut who films the sequence and also in a horizontal position. The astronaut who is filmed pushes down the object, little matters what it is, which one has a density a little lighter than the one of water. The object starts going down, but the push of Archimedes stops its progress, and forces it to move up back to the astronaut who has pushed it down. You see how simple it is when it is clearly explained to you. Of course, this sequence would have been impossible in a weightless environment. In a weightless environment, the object would have kept going in the direction that it has been pushed. It would not have gone back to the astronaut who has pushed it. So, saying that the sequences of weightlessness of Apollo have been filmed in water is not just a supposition, it can be proven by evidence. Note that the actors could perfectly have made the demonstrations so that we would have had no evidence that they had been made in water, and that we could have believed that they had actually been made in a weightless environment. This shows that the people who were in charge of faking the missions were intentionally giving clues that they were fake. The engineers have done exactly the same when they made suggestions to the astronauts as these ones were in the hypnotic sleep. They could have told them things which were making sense. They could have told them how the lunar module had to fly over the lunar surface. They did exactly the converse. They have suggested them complete bullshit, and it was absolutely intentional. If the moon hoaxers can spot so many anomalies in the footage of Apollo, it's absolutely not because those who made this footage were incapable. Much to the contrary, they were very capable, and they have made very shrewd demonstrations. They just wanted to give us the means of proving in a doubtless way that the missions were fake. However, the Apollo believers reject all the proofs. For them, there is not a single proof which exists that the missions were fake because their fascination for Apollo makes them completely blind. NASA can always hire pseudo-self-proclaimed experts to assert that the missions could not be faked. Their propaganda weighs nothing compared with the fact that the astronauts are totally incapable of coherently describing how they landed on the moon and what they did on it.